right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome again. Hi, good morning. Hope you guys are doing well. So this is the second installment of our new live stream format this semester. This is Chapman 10 a.m. to 10:50 a.m. March 18th. We're doing part 2 of our review session today, and I'm just getting the live stream started a little early. Welcome back. So take your time, file in. I'll be right back. Just getting everything set up and ready here in my house, so it's kind of convenient. Probably same for you. We have some important work to do today. We're just trying to get through more of the questions on the study guide, so hopefully you guys have your copy with you and you can go over the questions any order that you like. I'm going to also add an additional office hour tomorrow from 10 to 11 a.m. In the same live stream format that we have here. So feel free to attend that if you have like any last minute questions that you don't get covered today in this meeting. And yeah, I'm going to wait till 10. So about 4 minutes. So not to rush. But it's good to see you guys. Good morning. Hope you're all doing well. And any questions that you have about anything else? Hey, Jessica, good morning to you. Nice to see you guys. As before, you can always chat in the chat bar, and I'll reply to your questions in real time here. Questions, comments, or anything in between. Yeah, so the midterm, I'm going to submit this midterm to you guys. Hey, good morning, Caesar. At about 9:30 a.m. I know our class period doesn't begin till 10, but I'm just going to provide access to the study guide, test form at about 9:30 a.m. and then you'll have until 11 a.m. to return a file to me in an email as an attachment with the written responses to the questions. The study guide has something like around 40 questions on it. So I'm just going to take 10 questions off of that list, and that's going to be your test form. And it'll just say on the test form, answer 6 of these. So essentially, you'll have to answer 6 of the questions on the study guide out of a set list of 10 that I'll create. And you'll all receive by Blackboard the email with the attached file containing the test form. And then for you to submit your exam, you have to, type out or in some manner create a document file or a PDF and then send it back to me before the 11 a.m. hour starts. So it's going to be as much as probably 80 minutes or so for those that have access to the test, which I'll distribute at around 9:30, 9:40. I know some of you guys have class meetings perhaps from 9 to 9:50, and they might keep you busy until 10. But this is a test that's designed for the 50-minute period that we would have had in a physical meeting. So we're just doing our best, obviously, and I'm going to try and give you as much time as you need. But regardless of whether you can only start working on it at 9:50 or whether you're a student that has the benefit of a little additional time to get started at 9:45 or something, all students will have more time than would have been allotted in the original in-person format. So 6 written responses back to me as an attached file on Friday morning in your guys' class before no later than 11 a.m. I have to be strict with the time thing because that helps to control that you guys are responsible for the content and that you're not finding it from any other source. So whatever, that's going to be the way that we will do the midterm exam, and that's how you'll submit it to me. So you're going to be alert for an email incoming on Friday morning at approximately 9:30 to 9:45 a.m. It'll show you the questions that you need to answer. It'll give you the choice to answer 6 of the 10 in whatever order that you want, and then your job is just to send me back your written responses to 6 of those 10 questions. So that's the way that the midterm exam format will be, just letting you guys know while we're here to get together at the beginning of this live stream. It's just now clicked over to 10, so I guess we're officially doing our class time. So good morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing really well, staying healthy and safe. This is the second of our new online format for this Chapman class. This is 10 to 10:50 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday section, and March 18th, Wednesday. So it's review session part 2. I'm here with you guys to help you go over as many questions on the study guide as you might have. So I'm assuming you've got it with you. Good morning to you guys. How long should the answers be? They should be as long as they can be. They should be as detailed and thorough as possible. You know, you're the student that wants a good grade, right? So you should submit the most hardcore, lengthy, detailed answer that you possibly can. I always tell people to be maximalist when it comes to writing anything in school, not minimalist. So how long can my answer be ought to be your question. It could be as long as you want. But to be fair, probably for most people, a paragraph or 2. Now, when you ask me this question, Lily, should we handwrite or type the answers? I assume most will probably prefer to type since it's being sent via an attachment electronically, right? But I don't want to insist on it. If there's any student that does prefer handwritten that can scan, that would be okay. But basically, I just need it to be sent to me as a file. If it is the case that you send me some handwritten, scanned copy of pages, it would be good if it's legible. But yeah, I mean, I would have accepted handwritten responses if we were in class. Obviously, that's how it would have been done. But most will probably prefer to do a typed submission. So just make sure that it's sent to me in a way that I can open, dated, and without the benefit of advanced notes. And that should be good. So either way is fine, really. Okay, so yeah, most of the questions could probably be answered in a paragraph or 2 of solid good writing, but I don't like to give minimum or maximum length requirements because it kind of varies from student to student in terms of how concise they are. The standard, though, is you have to be completely detailed and accurate. So an answer could be complete but not accurate, meaning that it's talking about everything that author did mention, but it got the claims wrong and misinterpreted them. On the other hand, there could be an answer that's fully accurate but not complete. So everything they said was faithful to the author, but they didn't cover certain things the author said. So for you, the best case is to be, you know, maxing out both as accurate as can be. So no inaccuracies from the author's intended ideas, and fully complete, meaning that everything that they said that you did report on that's relevant to that question. Each question is going to be graded on a 0 to 4 point scale. So it's possible for a person to get more or less credit depending on the level of clarity, accuracy, and detail of their response. So you're trying to reach for 4s. Therefore, I advise you to give the most clear, detailed, and accurate answer that you can to try and get that 4. I see a question here, is the exam due before class ends? I'm setting the due time as 11 a.m., which is, I guess, slightly beyond the formal ending of our 10:50 hour. So the full window of time is going to be approximately like 9:40 a.m. for those that, you know, get the first early access to this Blackboard test form that I'll send by email. So it's kind of like an 80-minute window pretty much to answer 6 questions. You'll get access to the test form at about 9:30, 9:40, and then you'll be working on it and returning your submission to me no later than 11 a.m. So yes, it has to be sent to me by email as an attachment by 11 a.m. on Friday. That's for your class. Okay, so we've gone over at least some of the logistics, and I'm still here ready to help you guys out. So let me know which questions that you do have from our study guide, and we'll just jump right in, whatever order you want. And by the way, I don't want to forget this. I've mentioned it before, but I'm just going to repeat. Everyone's essays have been graded. Many of you have contacted me to get your score and to get your comments, and definitely do so if you would like it. I'm just replying to individual students to give a personalized response. So just let me know. If you have not asked about your essay, then anytime after this, you can email me and I'll be happy to reply back with your grade or comments if you would like it. Otherwise, no big deal. But that's just for your information. So looking at your guys' questions, let's see. Can I go over number 18? Can you do me one favor, guys? Because I'm not right now holding the list. Can you just type out the full question in terms of what you'd like me to go over? So, because the numbering is not going to help me at this moment, but I'm fully aware of what the information is for any questions. So could you just write the full text question out instead of just giving me the number, and we'll go in the order as soon as I start seeing those written down. So, okay. William, you're asking this question. Provide 3 reasons that God's hiddenness is a disadvantage according to Robert McKim. Okay. So Robert McKim wrote the essay, The Hiddenness of God. In that paper, he's exploring what is the significance of the fact that God is in some sense hidden, meaning that we don't have the ability to just make an easy verification that he exists, like by looking out or seeing something or hearing it. Because God is hidden, McKim thinks that presents certain disadvantages to us. For example, if God was not hidden, it would make it a lot easier for people to believe in him in the first place. But because he's hidden, it makes it harder for people to believe. So that's one disadvantage. He also said, because God is hidden, it makes it harder for people to establish a close personal relationship with God. Because with God being hidden, people might not think he really exists. So how is it that they're going to feel comfortable building this type of close, intimate relationship? That's 2 things. Harder to believe, first of all. Harder to develop close personal relationship. Third thing he says is that it also makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and worship God. If God wasn't hidden, then people wouldn't have any problem humbling themselves and praying to him and submitting themselves to his will, etc. So it also makes it hard for people to devote themselves to and worship God. Then he said it also creates the possibility for con artists and frauds to operate without being exposed, because if God was not hidden, he could demonstrate who it is in this world that's just using the concept of God for their own benefit or for their own purposes. And then last, he said that it also creates the possibility for social conflict and disagreement, and that's something that his hiddenness also opens up. So that's a further disadvantage. Anyways, that's it. He kind of said these are things that are disadvantageous about the idea that God is hidden. If he was not hidden, then none of these things would happen. There'd be no question about whether he exists. Everyone would be rushing to worship him, build a close relationship. There'd be no con artists out there using the concept of religion for their own purposes, and people wouldn't fight over their differences in religion because God would bring us all together by no longer being hidden. So those are things that he said were disadvantages in reaction to William's question. Now, Jordan, the looping track example. Okay, so let me see here. So I'm going to do the loop track thing. What does it mean by con artists to operate, Brian? Okay, well, there's some people out there that say, hey, I'm a faith healer. Let me put my hands on you and I'll heal your sickness, whatever it is, which is not true and is not scientifically recommended at all. And the reason these people say these things is because, I have a cat, okay, just so you guys understand, this is my cat. She's a good girl. So, everything's from home now, so you guys are going to get a little taste of some of these things. But back to what I was saying. Con artists can operate with impunity because God can't expose them as frauds or whatever. If God was not hidden, then he could say, don't rely on the words of these people that are just simply trying to make a buck by using the idea of God or whatever. So faith healers, televangelists, I don't know. There's probably a lot of people who can be called out on this basis. Thank you. Yeah, she's a 16-year-old cat. I mean, yesterday was her birthday and my birthday. So isn't that funny? We have the same birthday, St. Patrick's Day. She's 16 years old. She's a great kitty. But yeah, that's my pet. Anyway, that's the con artist thing. I'm just going into your question, Brian. But back up here, the looping track. That's what we're going to talk about next. Well, thank you guys. Yes, appreciate that. Could have been a happier birthday, I guess, given everything happening in the world. But whatever, it was fun. No, nonetheless. So I'm gonna help you with a loop track. Loop track. Okay, so trolley problem. There's a trolley out of control, gonna hit 5 people. It could be switched over to hit just 1. If a guy hits a switch, it'll hit the 1 person instead of the 5. So should he do it, or is it wrong if he does it? Most people say it's not wrong if he does that. But if good kitty, if the transplant surgeon kills 1 to save 5, people do think that that is wrong. So here we have a dilemma. Why is it that people say the one thing is wrong and not the other? Now, one solution that was attempted to this is called the Kantian solution. And so the idea there is maybe the reason that people think that it's wrong to do the transplant thing is because the victim there is used as a means. But the reason that it's not wrong to flip the switch and kill the 1 person in the trolley scenario is because that person's not used as a means. They're just on the track, but their death is really not what you're aiming at. You're just trying to get this trolley to avoid hitting the bigger group. At the last moment, if the trolley victim were to disappear from the track, then no one would have been harmed. But if at the last moment the transplant surgeon victim were to disappear, then you wouldn't have the needed organs, and so you couldn't have saved their lives. So some argue that because of the vital necessity of the death of the 1 individual in transplant, that means that person is used as a means, not so much the other victim in the case of bystander. But now the loop scenario, okay, understand me, the loop case is supposed to show that this Kantian style solution doesn't actually work. And why is that? Because in the loop case, we imagine that the track forms a loop like this. So in this version of the case, loop, you have this trolley, it's headed towards these 5 people, and bystander over here is hanging out nearby a switch. If he hits the switch, it's not going to hit these 5, it's going to go over here and hit the 1. But the point of the whole loop situation is that in whichever direction it goes, there's going to be enough mass to stop it from continuing around the loop. So if it goes straight forward to kill 5, 5 people will block it and it'll stop it from going over and hitting the 1. If it goes up and hits the 1, this is a large man, so he's going to be enough size to stop the trolley from continuing killing the other 5. So when loop has been presented to audiences and they ask the audience, is it wrong for this man to switch it to the 1? They say, no, that's not wrong, that's okay. But that shows that the Kantian solution doesn't work, because when we make loop the case that we compare with transplant, the 1 victim is used as a means, just like they are in transplant. Because if this guy was to magically disappear off the track as the trolley's coming at him, then the trolley would just continue around the loop and kill 5 people nonetheless. That's different from the one that's an unconnected, non-loop example, in which we just imagine, oh, we'll just continue off happily in the other direction and no one would ever get hit. So if we think that it's okay to act this way in loop, but it's not okay to do what the transplant surgeon does, then we can't just say, well, the difference that points out why we react differently is that in one case, one guy's used as a means and not in the other. Because loop basically restores equivalence to the case here with transplant, in which both are used as a means, but nonetheless, audiences only judge this to be okay, not transplant. So the loop scenario is to demonstrate the failure of the Kantian solution to the trolley problem, because once loop has replaced bystander, we can no longer distinguish bystander or trolley case from transplant by saying that in transplant there's a victim used as a means, but not in the other. So that's the point of loop. Now, I'm going back up a little bit to see questions that I didn't get to cover yet. 2 possible differences between killing and failing to assist. Okay, Brian, so that's from Peter Singer's article. Peter Singer says, if we're not out there helping the poor and sending money or something to help the poor people that are starving in the third world, is it kind of like killing people because we're just letting people die by not helping them by giving aid? Well, he says, no, maybe it's not exactly the same as killing, but what's the difference? And he lists 5 differences between killing and failing to assist. So what are the differences? On the one hand, he said, well, there's a different motive, because when you're trying to kill people, you want to end human life. But when you're just not assisting and you spend money for other things, like on yourself, you're not trying to hurt anybody. You're just trying to make yourself pleased and happy. So there's a different motive. when you kill versus when you just fail to assist. Another difference would be difference in terms of certainty of the outcome. He says when you set forth to kill, sorry to say, but it's pretty certain that some people are going to be killed or hurt, like highly certain, almost dead certain. But then if you fail to assist and you just don't give charity money or whatever, then you're not going to be as sure that that really is going to cause harm, because maybe this is an ineffective aid agency. Maybe the money that you could have given would have just been wasted on expenses that don't benefit anybody. So it's possible then to doubt the effectiveness of aid, and therefore the failure to give aid might not be necessarily as likely to harm as setting out to kill would. So we say difference of certainty, difference of motive. Identifiability of the victim was the third difference. One who kills particular people, and of course their deaths are the direct result of the killer's action. So they're responsible for it, they're at fault, and their victims and their identities are clear. But when you fail to assist, there's no similar way in which we can assign responsibility to you for a particular person's death anywhere in the world from starvation. If people starve today, as they will in fact, and you didn't give aid, we cannot place the blame at your feet for the particular individual's death, because there's no link, as it were, between one individual failure to act toward assistance and one randomly selected case of a death in the third world. So that's another difference, identifiability of the victim. So we said identifiability of the victim, different motive, certainty of the outcome. There's also this, he says, it's not hard to avoid killing, right? But it is hard to save lives by means of helping, by means of assistance. So you could say that's another difference. The expectation not to kill is easy to live up to. Just think about your own life. It's been very easy not to kill. But helping people requires not just inaction, it requires that you take action in order to provide aid or other relief efforts. So that's another difference. Easy to avoid killing, not so easy to save lives by assisting. And then the last was, you can always say it's not my fault they're poor when it concerns the global poor people that are starving. But you cannot say it's not my fault they're dead if you kill. So killing, you can't excuse the responsibility you have for the act. But when you fail to assist, you can say, well, I'm failing to assist, but I'm failing to assist in terms of a problem that I'm not myself the person who is responsible for the problem. So those are 5 differences between killing and failing to assist. There's different motive, certainty of the outcome, identifiability of the victim, not hard to avoid killing, but hard to save lives. And you can always say it's not my fault they're poor, but you can't say that about the case of killing. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for the question. I'm going back up to just make sure I'm covering all the questions I've seen. Nagel's criticism of the cosmological argument. All right, so that's not too hard. The cosmological argument says there's got to be a God, because what else could have created the universe? I mean, the universe can't create itself, and it got to have some kind of cause. And the cause can't be something contingent, because that would just lead us nowhere towards asking what its cause was. So eventually you got to get to the first cause, otherwise there'd be an infinite regress, which is impossible. So the first cause is not contingent, it's a necessary being, and it caused the universe and everything else. Now, what are some objections to this? That's what the question I see from Nelly is. What are Nagel's criticisms of that? So he has some straightforward objections. Number one, he says, well, I mean, how is it true? How could it be that everything has a cause but not God? Like, if everything has to have a cause, and that's the principle of sufficient reason, then why wouldn't God also have? But a second problem, a rap battle. I mean, I'm always ready to rap battle you or anybody. But second thing is this: if God could have no cause, right? If God could have no cause, then why can't the universe just be this uncaused necessary being? That's another possibility. So why suppose that the universe even requires something that brings it into being? It could maybe be the necessary being itself. And another thing he says is this: is an infinite regress really impossible? Because the cosmological argument says, yeah, that's impossible. That's why there's got to be a first cause. That's why there's got to be some necessary being that starts everything. But Nagel says, I'm not so sure that an infinite regress is impossible. Maybe it could be the case. After all, in math and stuff like geometry, we do have some basic conceptual understanding of what the concept of infinity is. So he thinks it's not altogether impossible then to have there be an actually infinite sequence of events that goes back to infinity, So those are all different objections that mentioned by Nagel. Why doesn't God have a cause? Or why can't the universe be uncaused and then just delete the assumption there's any God that caused it? Or could there be an infinite regress and just cause and effect goes back forever with no beginning? All possibilities, those are ways that he objected. Okay, so very good. And I'm moving down to see Justin is asking O'Neill's account of what it is to treat someone as a mere means. Okay, so Honora O'Neill was like a little short companion piece that I gave you guys to the work of Kant, to the Kantian ethics. Just gonna erase this loop. And then she said, I want to sort of bring down to earth and simplify the Kantian ethical concept. And what she said is, if you really want to understand it and boil it down to a pretty simple form, it's this idea that you just can't involve people in interactions that they would not consent to. So that's when you treat a person as a means. When you do something with or to them that they would not agree with, that they would not voluntarily consent to if they had the full information of what you're doing. So that's when you do treat a person as a means. So from Honora O'Neill's perspective, thinking about Kant, the moral law just commands this of you. Don't do things to people that they wouldn't agree with. That's it. Don't do anything with or to a person that they would not consent to. If you just avoid violating that principle, then you've lived according to the moral law and your actions are permissible. That's what he said. That's what she said in giving a breakdown and explanation of the sophisticated ideas of Kant. Okay, so I'm moving down a little. Singer's response to two of the objections to his argument. Okay, so that's from Justin. What are these responses? Well, objections to Peter Singer's argument include these. Taking care of our own, property rights, leaving it to the government, and triage. Those are four different objections to Singer's argument. So to give you a little context, Singer's argument overall just says, if you can prevent a bad thing without making a comparable sacrifice, then basically you should. And then after that, it says absolute poverty is one of those bad things. And then it continues by saying, and that is one of those bad things that you can prevent without making major comparable sacrifices. So the conclusion is, therefore, you should. Now, objections to that. And then I'll get to the real substance of your question, Justin, which is, how did Singer reply to the objections? So one objection is called taking care of our own. So a person may hear Singer's argument and say, no, this is not correct, because you say I have to do something to help the global poor, the international poor that are maybe going to starve. And one objection is, no, I don't have that obligation. No, because if I have obligations to anyone, it's just to my own, not a more extensive set of obligations that ranges over, the whole international community. I have maybe more limited obligations to care for people, and those are just my own. And what is intended by the term our own or my own is like our family, our friends, and then maybe our own fellow citizens living in poverty or whatever, but not the international community of poor. Now, that's one objection. How did Singer reply to that? Well, here's Singer's comeback against that. He says, first of all, how far away or how close a person is in terms of geographic distance, whether they're on your side of the border of a country or on somewhere else in the world outside of that country. He says, why should that make a difference to how much obligation you feel towards this person and their needs? How close or how far a person is, he doesn't think is really a relevant concern when judging what you ought to be doing for them morally. He says it's just as arbitrary as saying I only care about my own when I'm speaking about members of my own race, which most would think is an expression of a biased, bigoted, or prejudicial view of the world. So why is it okay to say I just care about my my fellow citizens, but it's not okay to say I just care about my members of my own race? So he thinks that's one problem. Also, he says, how can you prioritize the less important needs of your own over the more important needs of people that are starving in the third world? It's kind of like getting it backwards, because people in the first world that are your own are generally doing okay and are pretty well off. So how can we prioritize those unimportant needs over life and death struggles of the third world community? So that's the response given by Singer to the objection, take care of our own. Excuse me. A lot of talking early in the morning. So, but anyways, the second one is property rights. Some people would say, no, I don't have any obligation to assist the global poor because that's detracting from my property rights. My wealth, my income are part of my property, and telling me I have an obligation to assist the poor is like saying I have to surrender some of my property that I've earned for purposes I may not agree with. And when you have property, you have a right to do whatever you want with it, or not what you don't want to do with it, to spend it on yourself, to not spend it at all, or to spend it on things that are frivolous or whatever. So that's the property rights objection, that I'm entitled to do as I see fit with my own wealth, including not give it to the poor. But Singer reacts to that as well. He says, well, when you have property rights, sure, that means you're entitled to keep your wealth and do what you like with it. But there's a different question he's posing, which is what should you do morally, not what may you do according to your rights. And so lots of things that you're entitled to do under your rights are not good things, all things considered. Like, you have a right to drop out of school today, but I don't think it's the good thing for you to do that you ought to do. So just saying you have a right to not give doesn't mean that morally you shouldn't give. And then also he says, typically a lot of people reading this article are members of the West, and therefore they're going to be a lot of Christians. But most Christian people, he says, if they were really following their religious principles, they would not be able to say, I have no care for the poor, because it's emphasized a lot in the Bible, and especially by Jesus, that you're supposed to try and take a supreme concern with the weakest among us and be your brother's keeper, and etc. So he finds that to be a further point of critique, that it seems to be somewhat inconsistent with the professed religious principles of most people reading the article. Another objection is leave it to the government. Basically saying, well, shouldn't it be the government's job to provide this aid, if anybody, not individual citizens or private individuals, but you know, the state, because it can collect bigger revenue, then we're all invested in it, and it's not so inconsistent as a funding mechanism. But he also disagrees with that. So Singer's response to that objection is, well, more is better. And even if the government should give more, private citizens can do that as well. And the two things are mutually supportive. They're not mutually exclusive. So he doesn't see that as a very good objection either. And then one more objection was triage, which it's interesting and kind of weird timing, because the whole country and world is kind of, going to deal with the triage, a real world triage problem pretty soon, I believe, with this coronavirus thing. So, okay, triage is a medical policy that's implemented when you have too many injured or sick persons and not enough doctors and medics to provide for care. So what do when you have too many people that need help medically and not enough medical support? That then requires triage policy. And that means that you have to divide people into different categories depending on the level of their injuries or whatever. And then you have to try and apportion aid in a way that's going to make the most life-saving effect. So you would not, in a triage scenario, attend to the needs of the people that have the worst case injuries. In triage, you divide people into three groups: the people that are so badly injured or sick that they're not likely to survive even if you did provide help. On the opposite extreme, you have people that are so minor injured that they're likely to survive even if they don't receive immediate help. And then there's this intermediate middle category of people that are kind of on the bubble, who will probably survive if they get help, but won't survive if they don't. And so if you're a triage technician, you would advise the wave of available paramedics and stuff not to attend initially to the people with the worst case injuries, because essentially it's a lost cause. And while you're trying to help them and they're dying anyway, regardless of your valiant efforts to save them, there's other people who the same level of attention could have more effectively saved. And this is kind of like how it might be in our own country when we get, the hospitals overwhelmed by cases of this virus. Then they are going to have to make choices. Like if a person comes in, they're symptomatic, but the symptoms are very minor and they look younger and healthier, they'll say, okay, you go back to quarantine at home, because precious medical resources have to be given to people that have a more serious, life-threatening case. And then people who come in and they're like on death's door, looking like no matter what you do, they're likely to die. Then they may have to actually be denied coverage or help, because there are people that are slightly less on the extremes, who the same level of attention could maybe prevent their death more easily. So it's a terrible thing, but it becomes utilitarian necessary in a way to mitigate the overall loss of life. Now, this functions as an objection to Singer in theory, because when he says help the poorest of the poor, some people argue that that's kind of like advising medics to attend to the people with the most grave injuries, who are essentially likely to stay injured and dead, even if they received help that they would like to get. So don't help the poorest people that are likely to starve, even if you give them money, because it's a lost cause, essentially. And the aid or money could be more effectively used in cases that are less extreme than that. Well, Singer's response to this sophisticated triage objection is also important. He says, the point of view of the triage objection is, well, triage is only necessary when you have these two factors: too many people that need help and not enough people to provide the help. So it's kind of when you have like an overpopulation of people with medical needs. And the triage objection says you're not going to cause that problem to go away by focusing on the people with the worst case injuries, or in the real case he's discussing, with the worst case of poverty. You're not addressing the root causes of poverty. And in effect, you're just going to cause this group to expand in size until such time as it becomes impractical and impossible to provide further aid. And then it'll be an even worse situation at that point. But Singer says if your real concern, the triage objector, is with the size of this cohort of poor people that are starving, there's a better way to reduce that size than to allow the death rate to increase through the withdrawal of aid. And that would be for the birth rate to decrease. And that is actually achievable by means of international aid in a couple of forms: contraceptive access, education and equality of women in that society, and some limited forms of food and educational assistance. So when those things are provided, population sizes seem to go down because family planning decisions are made more carefully and family sizes are smaller. Wouldn't that be, he says, a better way to address the perceived problem of overpopulation of the third world than to rapidly withdraw aid and see the numbers decrease by means of attrition, meaning people dying? People dying is obviously much worse than fewer people being born in the first place, because when fewer people are born, there's no individual who loses their life. They just don't begin it in the first place. So that's Singer's reaction to that. He says the triage objection is responding to a concern with oversized populations in the third world that won't go down if we help them with food aid. But he says there are different ways to achieve the stated goal of population reduction in the third world to address that concern, that don't revolve around withdrawal of aid and an increased death rate, but rather supplying of aid to decrease birth rate. All right, so I had to give you a lot of information there because the question was about Singer's response to two of the objections to the argument. So even though you don't have to talk about everything I just talked about, because I gave you 4 objections and 4 responses, I wanted to give you the full range of information. So that's what we did there. A little more water. Okay. All right, I see William. Explain 2 reasons that Clifford gives why we should not have a credulous character. Okay. So W.K. Clifford, he wrote the article, what's it called? The Ethics of Belief. And in that article, he gives this example of a ship owner who basically wants to believe that the ship thank you, Justin. He wants to believe that the ship will successfully return on one more venture, even though evidence that he's clearly aware of is that the ship is damaged and very dangerous to sail, not likely to work, not likely to return. But he hopes it does, and so just based on his hopeful, wishful thinking, he believes it will. Now, it could sink. Maybe it will. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But even if it doesn't, it's just wrong in any case for him to, allow it to do that and to believe that it would work out, because that flies in the face and it contradicts the evidence that he's got. So Clifford derives this principle from that, which is that it's wrong for anyone, anywhere, anytime to believe anything that's not based on sufficient evidence. It's wrong to believe things just because you want them to be true. It's only okay to believe things, Clifford is saying, when you have good, solid evidence that demonstrates that it probably is true. Now, why does he say it's bad to form beliefs in this other way, just based off hope and wish? He says, well, that's kind of like a credulous character. A credulous character is somebody who believes things that they really shouldn't believe if they just looked at the evidence. They give credibility to things that they shouldn't, that don't deserve to be regarded as credible based on the evidence and the state of the evidence. And he says there's harm that comes from having a credulous character, and he mentions 2 kinds of harm. Basically, there's self-harm and there's social harm. The self-harm aspect is that when you have this credulous character, you are no longer a person who can really judge what's true and false. Because anytime there's something that seems like scary or negative or whatever, You can't stand to believe that that's really true. And so you cannot follow the evidence where it leads if it leads to, let's say, an unfavorable conclusion. That's not good for you. If you're one of those people, for example, who says, nothing bad can happen to me. I know there's a virus out there, but nothing really could happen. I just want to hope that I won't get it. I just want to hope that I couldn't pass it to anybody, even though evidence shows that it's probably possible. You going with your hope just because it feels good, it might lead you in a worse outcome in the end, right? Than if you had acted prudently on the basis of the evidence. So you want to know what's true and false, not just what sounds good. And that's one reason that this is self-harmful to you if you form a habit of taking on beliefs without any good rational basis behind it. And then it's the social harm is just sort of compounds on the self-harm. Like the same way that it could harm you in terms of making you a poor judge of truth and falsity, that could then spread to other people and cause them to be the same. Like, so even if you don't have a huge position of power or influence, there's some people who are going to pay attention to you and the things that you do and say. And when those people find you forming beliefs in this credulous way, then they'll do it as well. And pretty soon that habit of mind spreads through the community, and it's not healthy for anybody. So he says there's a real cost to having a credulous character. Maybe it just feels good to you when you're sitting there like, I just believe whatever I want. Whatever makes me feel good today, I'll just believe it. He says there's a serious cost to that. It's harmful to you and to others for the reasons I just gave. So you can find all that in the book too. By the way, just note, and I think I've said it before, but I like to repeat that everything that I'm telling you is just from the book. None of it's coming out of my mouth except for just putting it forward from the text. So never fear, and always have confidence that you can go right back to the book. And if you hadn't done it before, just kind of skim it and reinforce the knowledge that you're learning with my help, in our class meetings and stuff. Okay, so I see a question about problem of evil. Okay, so problem of evil is an argument, and sometimes is given by atheists to try and show. Oh, sorry, Jordan. Well, I'll get to your question in a minute, but just for the next second, it says, is the main purpose of the argument from design to portray that if something has a purpose, it must have been created by an intelligent creator? Well, I mean, that is the main point of it, but there's a lot of details. There's a watch. It says if you found a watch, a watch has to have a creator because it has a function, and all the parts that are inside of it have to be assembled with a precise ordering so that it does produce the function of time telling. Then the eye is compared to the watch by analogy. Okay, because the eye is something found in nature, not made by a man or woman, but something found in nature that also performs a function. And so the analogy is that if a thing with a function must have a designer, such that a watch must have a watchmaker, and things that are in nature that have a function or design, like an eye, for example, must also have the corollary to a watchmaker. In this case, it's the designer of nature, and that would be God. So you have to talk about the analogy. Watchmaker is to watch as God is to eye. And you'd have to talk about the principle that a thing with a function or purpose clearly has a creator, using the watch as the example to display that intuition. So, I mean, you asked the question, is it just the main purpose that something with a design or purpose must have had a creator? Well, yeah, that is the main point, but there's complexity within that. There's an analogy, a precise analogy of a watch and an eye. You start with the watch example. You point out that it's evident and obvious to any common sense person that this watch can't assemble itself or come about through chance. So how could that be any different with the eye? That's the argument. But back to what I was saying about problem of evil. Okay, so problem of evil is an argument that's given by atheists to try and establish that there's no God, the non-existence of God. And it's a pretty simple argument, so I'll just write it here really fast. So in logic, we list arguments like that. We have premises, and then a conclusion that follows from them. In this case, there's two premises. So the first one says if God existed, there'd be no evil in the world. Okay. The second premise just says, but there is evil. But there is evil, though, in the world. And so therefore, the conclusion is God does not exist of this argument. Now, in our class, Ernest Nagel presented this argument. He's an atheist, and so he's trying to, defend the position of atheism. And this is a classical argument that's been given throughout the years by many different people. And some people find it, persuasive, some don't. But the argument says, Okay, first premise. If God existed, then there would not be any evil. Why did a person ever say that? Well, the argument goes because God, as we understand the idea, is the perfect being, a being that has got unlimited power and is perfectly good. So if there's a being that's got all the power, infinite power, then he could do anything, including stop evil at any moment just by wanting to. And then the other part is that he's perfectly good. He's omnibenevolent. So a perfectly good being wouldn't like evil, wouldn't want there to be evil. So if he's perfectly good and he could do anything, he wouldn't allow there to be evil. But nonetheless, the second premise says there is evil in the world, a lot of bad stuff happening to people for no good reason, it seems, in a lot of cases. And when you look at that, some people argue that's just not what God would have allowed if he really did exist. But nonetheless, we see that evil, so there can't be a God. That's the argument's conclusion. Some people wouldn't agree with it for different reasons. Nagel talked about some of those responses. But anyway, that's really it, the problem of evil argument. So I think so far, so good, guys. I'm seeing all the, questions that you've asked so far. I think I've covered every one that has been raised, but we still have a few minutes anyway. So I'm happy to take like another crack at another question if you have one, or however many with a few minutes left. And just remember, as I've said, just my little announcements, you're going to be looking for my email submission through Blackboard of the test form on Friday morning for your class at approximately 9:30 to 9:45. No later than 9:45, I'll say. And then you have to return it back to me with your written answers no later than 11 as an email response with your attached file. That's the way that the midterm will go. And then I'm also going to have office hour tomorrow from 10 to 11 that I'll just live stream here. Some people might come, some won't. We'll see if that just becomes me hanging out on the live stream or if people do attend. But you have that option as well to get some additional help if you'd like it. Maybe fewer people, so you can have more questions of your own answered, perhaps. Just some reminders again. And then you can also, again, send me a message at any time in order to request your grade and comments if you want them for your first essay. Those have all been graded. Okay, so William, 3 things that Paley says would not undermine the judgment that a watch sitting in the forest must have been made by a watchmaker. Okay, so Paley begins by saying, you know a watch has a watchmaker. That's just obvious. There's no way a watch could have come about through any other source. Like a watch, it can't come through some chance event. It can't be just a big coincidence that all the parts just somehow fell in place. It has to be something that's got intelligence that designs it so that it would be able to do that. And he says there are things that no one would ever cause them to doubt that the watch had a maker. So for example, if you've never seen a watch being made, you know nonetheless that it has a maker. That would not cause you to doubt that it had a maker. If the watch is broken and it's not properly working, that's not going to cause you to think that it did not have a maker. Just like if you saw, let's see, a cell phone with a cracked screen and maybe you can't really open the apps or something, it's got now malfunctioning. That doesn't strike you as a thing that never came out of the process that starts with intelligent architects and designers of those objects. A broken watch is still something evidently that is created for that purpose of time telling. And then the third thing would be no one would think that the watch doesn't have a maker just because they don't know how it works. So whether you don't know how it works or whether you've never seen it work or even if it's broken, those are none of them things that would cause you to doubt that it had a maker. And additionally, he says nobody would substitute the idea that it had a maker with the idea that it somehow came through like random processes in nature. Okay, so those are points made by Paley on that particular question. And then I see some here from Caesar, an action that is morally obligatory according to one theory and impermissible according to another. If that question were selected, you basically would have to come up with an example of a behavior or an action that the 2 ethical theories we studied would not agree on. One possible type of example could be something where, though a lot of utility is created by the action, it involves utilizing someone as a means. And in that case, it would be something that would be obligatory to the utilitarian, but forbidden to the Kantian, like maybe a transplant type scenario. And you can also imagine a case which would be obligatory to a Kantian to act that way, but impermissible to a utilitarian to act that way. So for example, in Kant's philosophy, he talks about a person asking you a question that if you tell them the truth to the question in your answer, that's going to hurt somebody. Like say that you were giving safe harbor to like a Jewish person in World War II during the Nazi era, like in the Anne Frank house. And then Nazi officers came to your house asking, are you holding any such people in the attic? Now you could tell the truth. Yeah, yes, actually, I do have one. If that was the case, though, that person would be confiscated and killed, right? So that's not good. And if you lied, maybe they say, okay, thank you. Well, we're moving on to the next home. And then their life would not be ended and they'd be spared. Now, a utilitarian would say you probably should lie there. Why? Because lying would create better overall consequences for overall happiness than telling the truth would. But Kant would say the moral law commands you never to lie, regardless of the consequences, because you cannot universalize the maxim of lying. This principle cannot be universalized. I will tell a lie when I believe it to be in somebody's benefit. Because if that was true, if that was done universally, then lying would become the rule rather than the exception, and we can no longer rely on truth in statements. So whether you choose an action that is obligatory to Kant and impermissible to utilitarian, or obligatory to a utilitarian and impermissible to Kant, those are the kinds of actions that that question would ask you to supply. And maybe we just have a brief moment to say a few things about the last question I see here from you, Caesar, which is explain an objection to Pascal's wager. Okay, Pascal said it's better to just believe in God because you really don't have anything to lose, and you might be correct, and if you're correct, you could go to heaven. But if you don't believe in God, you can't really gain anything, and even if you're right, there's nothing to gain. And if you're wrong, you might be going to hell or you might not go to heaven. So he says, Pascal says, it's just safer to believe because you're putting less at risk and you could potentially get a reward. Even though it's a 50-50 whether God exists or not, it'd be better to be wrong by believing than to be wrong by not believing. Okay, now objections to that include Clifford, who said it's wrong to believe things without good enough evidence. You shouldn't believe things just because you hope they're true, and that's what Pascal's saying to do. And then McKim, the hiddenness of God. He said, God is hidden. So since he's hidden, it's not exactly like he's making it easy for us to believe in him. And maybe this shows that he doesn't even care whether we believe in him. And if we don't think that God cares whether we believe in him, then the Pascal's wager doesn't matter because it's no longer therefore seen as a necessary means to getting a reward by believing or to be punished by not believing. If God doesn't care one way or the other, then who said he's going to punish non-believers and reward the believers? So that would undermine the wager in a different way. Okay, so I want to thank all you guys for your attendance and participation in these live streams. I think they're going pretty well so far. I know we're trying to improvise and just do the best we can. But I think so far, so good, and we'll just continue in the same way. So we got an important Friday, event. That's your midterm. I'm not going to be like live streaming in the same way. Maybe I'll turn it on, but for the most part, that's your work, and I don't want you to be distracted by me and the screen. So I'm just going to send you guys this test form Friday morning. Make sure to open your emails and have good access and have the ability to write and return back to me in an attachment your submitted responses. So I'll see some of you guys again tomorrow, maybe, if you choose to come to my 10 a.m. additional bonus office hour for Thursday morning. But until then, take care, stay healthy, you guys, and thanks again, and I will see you soon. All right, bye-bye.